We're lucky today to have a graduate from the class of 1985, okay? And in 1985, this room was here, but it was smaller, and we rearranged it so it could fit all the students here. We used to have sort of butcher block. We should have had seats, risers above there behind Mr. Ronick and Mr. Sednitsky, okay? So just imagine that. And he started as a third former, front row, then slowly moved back and sat in the butcher blocks. So he's a Golden Eagle. And I don't think we called it Golden Eagles back then. And then after Eaglebrook, he went on to Northfield Mount Herman School, about 30 minutes away to the north. And 10 years, if you can believe it, 10 years after he graduated from Eaglebrook, just imagine, well, fifth formers, 11 years after graduating from Eaglebrook, he started a company called Dogfish Head Beer and Brew Company. And it was focused on brewing beers with culinary ingredients, and he did this and started in 1995 when Dogfish Head first opened as the smallest craft brewery in America at the time. And now breweries are proliferated. They're all over the place. We have 5 or 6 just in the valley here. And then he also founded an inn called Dogfish Inn. And then also he does fine spirits also, and currently sells beers, spirits, and canned cocktails across the United States. And in the year 2019, he sold or he merged his company with the Boston Beer Company, and they're well known for Sam Adams. So now, and I think, Sam, you still sit on the board of the Boston Beer Company, okay? And this is what they say. We talk a lot about Eaglebrook, about communication, collaboration, innovation. This is what they say about Sam, a lot of our graduates. Sam's innovative style and collaborative spirit has earned him a reputation as one of the industry's most adventurous entrepreneurs and brewers. And he's written 4 books, and he's married to Mariah, and they have children. And Mariah's on the Board of Trustees up at Northfield Mount Herman. And he lives in coastal Delaware. I'm going to tell a little stories about at Eaglebrook. He tried everything. He was a very good athlete. He was on varsity football, hockey, and lacrosse. And he also took part in all the electives, from drawing, ceramics, painting, woodworking, and photography. And I think those contributed to his focus in what he did later on in life. He was a little rambunctious at the time, but he got the focus here. And he was also on something called a social committee. I don't think we have a social committee. We have a weekend committee, because we didn't have social media back then, because the iPhone really wasn't invented until 2007. So Sam, you might know where you're sitting. I thought I'd also, the 9th graders aren't here, but as heads of school, Mr. Loftus and I, and we write an appraisal. And this is what my father wrote along with Mr. Keep about Sam when he graduated, okay? Because we always sort of describe what the student is here. You're building, we talked to the 5th form yesterday about building your resume, who you are. So we said all this about him, what I just said. And having said all this, we still feel Sam has the necessary stuff to succeed in a challenging environment. He is an interesting, likable young man who will rise to the occasion and to challenges. We are sure, and we very much we hope, a demanding school will give Sam a chance. The experience will not be dull. Of that, we are confident. How about that, Sam? Welcome, Sam Calagione.
Yeah, you could see my report was heavily edited there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I'm excited to be back up here on campus with you guys. Know that there'll be a Q&A at the end, and I've gotten permission that whoever asks a question, the first, I think 6 or so, 5, get a Dogfish Head hat. There's no mention of the word beer here, and we make stuff besides beer, so anyone's eligible for a hat. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, both coming from Eaglebrook, what I got from here that gave me great momentum as I went into the next chapters of my life, but I'll also kind of tell you just an entrepreneurial story. Those of you, odds are, with this many kids in the room, many of you will pursue a career in business, and some of you may opt to do it where instead of working for a business that someday you may strike out on your own. So I'll talk a little bit about, how my education and my experience played into that evolution for me. So as Andy mentioned, I'm proud that I had a long time tenure here at Eaglebrook, and Andy mentioned some of the activities that I was involved in from sports and beyond. But really what was most formative for me here is it's where the faculty made me fall in love with storytelling, particularly through the English classes and the history classes that I took here, and reading Fitzgerald short stories and Salinger's books and Hemingway and Willa Cather and I believe Kipling. We have a cabin of Kipling on this beautiful campus. So that's where that really became something that I fell in love with. And I was a day student in Greenfield, and we had a World Eye bookstore, I think, downtown. And my mom was a special ed teacher, and my dad was a tooth doctor here, and I was a day student. And they really inspired me to, amplify my love of storytelling. My mom would give me money every week to go get a comic book or a book from World Eye Bookstore, and my love of reading was really gained traction at the school through the wonderful teachers that we've had here. So away we went, and the word rambunctious was said. I was a pretty rebellious kid, and I was really only getting started on my rebellion phase on this campus. I kind of perfected, or the opposite of perfection, that phase. I'm having a hard time moving these slides. Maybe if I click to the slides, let's see what happens here. No? Okay, I'll click through them this way. So I left this campus, graduated from here, was not on high honors. I don't think I had the best SAT scores, but I knew that I wanted to go to Northfield Mount Herman. And so my three siblings, one went to Stoneleigh Burnham, my little sister went to Deerfield Academy, I went to Northfield Mount Herman. And in that era, Northfield Mount Herman actually had two campuses that were a good 7 miles apart from them. They combined a women's school and a boys' school. And there's so many amazing, prep schools that a lot of the sixth formers are out visiting today, and there's wonderful public schools in this region. But there was something I really loved about Northfield Mount Herman. It's unlike a lot of its peer schools, from the one Deerfield down the hill to Amherst, Exeter, etc. It was actually started by an evangelist preacher, and for the first 50 years of its existence, none of the children paid salary. They would intentionally focused on going into cities where there were underprivileged kids and allowing them the opportunity to come out to the country in Western Mass and go to school. And to make that economically feasible, the other components of the school that were pretty unique is it had a working farm and has a working farm on its campus, and every kid that attended there had to do a work job. And essentially it meant that the kids were subsidizing the operations of the school by doing everything from running the coal-fired plant that heated the school, to the kids would do all the laundry, the kids would prepare all the meal, slaughter the cows and the pigs right on their own campus. So it was a real self-sustaining DIY entrepreneurial environment. And the rallying cry of the school is educating the head, the heart, and the hand. And those three tenets have really come to life in the work my wife Mariah, who I met in high school and became my wife and my co-founder of my company. Those three tenets have really resonated with us. So what does that mean, educating the head, heart, and the hand? So the head's the obvious one, right? Academia, making us smarter in the classrooms with our teachers. The hand was because we had that farm, because there was the expectation that everyone would chip in like you guys do in the dining hall, that we knew that working with your hands, actually rolling your sleeves up to do productive work was critical, not just your mind. And then the heart, educating the heart, that was all about, can you use your education to give back to the communities that gave you your opportunities? And that has been really important to Mariah and I as we've grown Dogfish Head. So went to North Mount Herman. As I said, that's kind of when my rebellious streak peaked, and I actually I'm one of the few people you'll meet who graduated from college without actually getting a high school degree, and that's an elite group, not quite like Mensa, but basically, as I was in March of my senior year in high school. I'd gotten into so much trouble that Northfield Mount Herman decided they did not need me to stay for the rest of the year. And it was absolutely tragic and heartbreaking for me because I loved that place, but I was rebelling in ways that were unproductive. I always had this creative desire to express myself, but in storytelling, and sometimes the stories that I would create and make come to life in my antics on campus did not serve me well. So fortunately, my parents were full pay capable for colleges, and a few colleges still let me in, even though I didn't get a high school diploma. So I ended up going to a school called Muhlenberg College, great little college, Division III college down in Pennsylvania, because I was a football and hockey player at Northfield Mount Herman, and that the coaches were interested in having me come to that school. So I got to Muhlenberg, and that's where I could declare a major, and I knew from leaving Eaglebrook through Northfield Mount Herman, through my college, that I wanted to be an English major. I wanted that opportunity to bring stories to life. And then after my time at Muhlenberg, the day I graduated from college, I'm like, I'm going to the big city. I grew up in the farmlands of Greenfield, and literally the day after graduating from college, I got my piece of junk Saab hand-me-down car from my parents and drove to Manhattan, got a roommate, and away I went. I started taking writing classes at Columbia University, one of the greatest Ivy League colleges in the country, and it had a great literary tradition. Beat poets like Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac went through that program, so it was a very romantic opportunity for me. And so I was taking courses to potentially fully enroll to get my CFA, creative fine arts degree in writing. But really, I went from the small pond of a tiny college that only had like 2,000 people into the big leagues of one of the best literary programs in the world. And I saw that while I was a good fiction writer, short story writer, poetry writer at Muhlenberg College, I was not as great as some of these amazing storytellers that came from around the world to go to Columbia. But I adapted, and to earn my rent in that era, I was working at a restaurant on the Upper West Side, and I didn't know it when I got the job, but it was like a first-generation craft beer bar. So as Andy mentioned, there's now tons of breweries, but in the 90s, this idea of opening a small microbrewery was still a really novel idea, because like many industries in America during the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the tiny little mom and pop stores, whether it was a sausage making thing or a bakery or a brewery, a lot of those got consolidated. When industrialization happened, these artisanal vocations, jobs, became industrialized. People moved to the cities, more robotic, more mechanic, and the big companies kind of gobbled up the small. But in the 70s, President Carter made it legal to make beer in your home again. He passed a law where you could homebrew and make beer in your house, and it kind of sparked a revolution. These homebrewers were tired of this industrial, flavorless beer from, I won't say the names, but the international brewing conglomerates had kind of dumbed beer down to just this one light thing that didn't offend anybody, but didn't excite anybody either. So these small breweries, these home brewers that had a vision and a dream said, you know what, I'm going to give people an opportunity to try something more flavorful. And they started these tiny breweries. And those were the beers that I was selling at this bar in New York City and getting really passionate about, and saw that I could use my love of storytelling to express how these different beers would taste and make recommendations on which dishes and foods people should pair them with. And quickly my thought pattern adapted from I want to try to write the next great American novel to maybe I could use my love of storytelling to create the next American great beer. And why can't an idea for a beer be as provocative and memorative and creative as a short story? So away I went. This is, as Andy said, right on the precipice of the internet era. So I didn't have the internet, and what I would do is wait tables, bartend at night, stopped taking classes at Columbia, and then instead during the day I would go to the New York City Public Library, and I started doing Nexus searches on small breweries opening in America, small artisanal coffee roasteries, all these little businesses that could inspire me, and I started writing a business plan. And those of you who maybe have family members in business or have talked about the concept of a business plan on this campus, a business plan is essentially a map, a written map of how you're going to take this concept that's in your head and turning into a functioning, actual, real business. And usually those business plans are used to convince investors and banks to give you money to fund the ideas that you put within that plan. So when you think about it, a business plan is the quintessential example of a work of fiction. It doesn't exist yet, right? And then it comes, you have to you got to get a lot of people excited to come together and help you turn your work of fiction into a work of nonfiction, a real functioning business. So in that way, using that storytelling love that I had to write that business plan and then inspire a bunch of talented people who had better skills than me in a lot of areas to join the journey is really at the crux of the success of Dogfish Head, our company. And certainly central to that is my wife, Mariah, who went to Northfield Mount Herman. Her parents own a little TV station. He graduated from Northfield Mount Herman, went to Brown, and started with a little radio station. During the day, he was out selling ads for the radio station. At night, he was the DJ, actually playing the tunes. So Mariah came with this entrepreneurial blood. So did I. My dad, as I said, was a tooth doctor here in the Valley, but he opened 5 different offices between Amherst and Brattleboro and Burlington. So he was an entrepreneur as well as a teacher. So the first page of my business plan said that Dogfish Head would be the first commercial brewery in America focused on making beers with culinary ingredients. Because when I said beer got dumbed down to this one thing by the big companies, that one thing universally, kind of globally, beer's made with 4 ingredients: water, yeast, hops, and barley, right? And the science is the yeast eats the sugars and converts the sugars to alcohol, and the byproduct is CO2, which is what creates the gas for the nice foamy head in the beer. So I want to be a brewery that looked with a chef's eye globally for culinary ingredients that could taste as good in beer as barley and hops. And that was the first page of the plan. The second page of my business plan was this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who transcendentalist writer who grew up maybe an hour from here. And the concept, you guys can read it yourself, but the whole concept is going on this exploration of goodness. And it's about not like paying attention to the status quo, what the world's biggest breweries are doing, but going on this unique kind of path less traveled, and then doing the storytelling around why you chose that different path to convince people to go on that path with you, to prove that it's a valid place and it deserves to exist. So that was sort of our rallying cry. As Andy said, I was only 24 years old, 2 years out of college when I wrote the business plan and started making little batches of homebrew, bringing them to banks, bringing them to investors to say, hey, help me get my dream started. And I was able to convince my orthodontist, who was in Amherst, a guy I built stone walls for as my summer job, Bill Sandry, who's from this valley and was an entrepreneur himself, my dad, and another guy, convinced them to lend me $110,000, and then with that money, my dad put his office up as collateral, and the bank with that collateral said, we'll lend you 110 as well. So I had 110,000 from private investors and then 110 in bank debt. And then so away we went. I took an old restaurant in this town, beach town of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. So it's middle of nowhere. Delaware, it's the only state in the country that doesn't have a commercial airport. But what it does have is it's a 2 hours drive from DC, Baltimore, Philly, 3.5 from Manhattan. My wife Mariah was from Delaware. She was a boarding student at MH. I was a day student. So I would go down there and wait tables when we were in college. I fell in love with coastal Delaware, and I thought, if I open a brewery in Deerfield, I'll be the third brewery, to open after Northampton and Berkshire Brewing Company. If I open my brewery in Delaware, I'll be the first commercial brewery to be open in that state since Prohibition in over 50 years. So I knew there'd be great marketing and storytelling value to open the first brewery in the first state. So Delaware's called the first state because we signed the Declaration of Independence first. So I thought that would be a great marketing thing. And I knew if I was going to brew a high-end product, sell a high-end product, it'd be beneficial to be in a radius to hit all of those cities, right? So then I'm like, all right, I'm only 24, 25. I don't have a lot of money for marketing. What are we going to do to stand out? And so you couldn't fit that Emerson quote onto a six-pack. It's too many words. So sometimes when you're doing your storytelling, there's reasons to try and be as concise as possible. There's reasons why you could have a long-form poem, from someone like Longfellow, but then the value of a haiku, a really tight and condensed poem has value too. And so we would condense down these more lofty, verbose rallying cries into things that we could actually talk to with customers and see if they wanted to go on this journey with us. So again, we focused on beer inside of a restaurant, but I wanted to do other creative things because I really always had this itch to innovate. And so we evolved this rallying cry, this first one, into off-centered goodness for off-centered people. So if you remember, that Emerson quote was centered around this ideal of going on an exploration of goodness. And I knew as a company I didn't want to just make beer. I wanted beer to be kind of the heart of our company, the big muscle pumping our brand out coast to coast. But I wanted the soul of our company to be innovation and do different things. And I'll just show you in a little bit the different things that we do around beer that make us kind of unique in the industry. As Andy mentioned, my wife and I, with some coworkers, grew Dogfish Head from the smallest brewery in the country. When we opened, there were about 600 breweries in America. The average one was making 200 gallons of beer, in tanks about the size of this stage. I was making them in 12-gallon little pots that I built myself, the brewing equipment, because I didn't have a lot of money as a young kid. So we started really, really small, but that was actually helpful because I could take all these risks, tiny risks with little batches to trial ingredients that had never been used commercially in beer before, and I wasn't making huge risks. I could adapt and quickly react to the smaller risks to evolve the recipes to really work. And then I would drive my pickup truck up to New York City with 2 pallets of beer and 2 cold buckets of beer, walk around the restaurants and try and convince the restaurants to buy my beer with one of the buckets, and the other bucket I would have called in advance a editor at Food and Wine magazine or the Today Show or Inc. magazine, Forbes, Sports Illustrated, and I would say, hey, if I bring free beer to your offices, can I tell you about the beer for a happy hour? And I knew, again, with the storytelling capability and being only 3 hours away from the media capital of our country, where so many stories are built, that I didn't have a big marketing budget. I couldn't afford billboards or TV ads. But if I could tell a story convincingly about a beer and why it's so creative, then the beers themselves became a de facto marketing campaign. And the PR of the beers led to stories on our tiny little brewery, being printed in Food and Wine, being printed in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and all of a sudden, nationally, people were starting to talk about and look for Dogfish Head. And that did coincide with the era of the internet taking off, and there are these websites like Beer Advocate and Rate Beer, where beer lovers that couldn't find these little beers before could go to these central places and start hearing about what beers are really cool and getting a lot of love in different parts of the country. And then that led to distributors. So brewers sell their beer to a distributor who sells it to a restaurant or a bar or store who sells it to the customer. It's called a 3-tier system. So our reputation was such in that era that we had retailers and distributors from around the country calling for our beer. And we became one of the fastest growing breweries in the country. And, Mariah and I knew what we were good at. I'm good at the storytelling, coming up with recipes. Mariah's really good at the community building and the social media. But we knew what we weren't good at: math, frankly, science, not very good. I could come up with a great beer recipe, brewed in a small batch, but scaling that up to national production scale, I was not great at. So I think one of the most important powers that an entrepreneur or business person has, or any leader, is having the humility to say, as an entrepreneur, you got to wear a lot of hats. When you start and you're small, you got to do everything because you can't afford to hire a plumber, a guy to paint the walls. You do it all yourself. But once you're starting to get some traction in growing your company, having the humility to say, I can't keep wearing all these hats. Which hats fit me gracefully, and which hats are really uncomfortable. So really early in our entrepreneurial journey, I was like, I suck at math. I better find someone who's really good at accounting, and we hired a chief financial officer. I'm not great at the details of an HR org chart plan, so I need to hire someone who's really a woman who's really good at organization to run our HR department. And by doing that, we could focus on the parts of the world that we were good at, And again, World Eye Bookstore, reading the Marvel and DC comics about, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and seeing how, it'd be pretty boring if they all had the exact same superpower. So trying to create like a team of superheroes who have complementary superpowers, not the same ones, is an amazingly important component of a successful business if you want to scale it and grow it. So we grew Dogfish from the smallest brewery in the country to a top 20 brewery in America. And along that way, when we opened, there were 600 breweries, and by the time we were a top 20, there was almost 9,000 breweries. So it became hyper competitive. And even though we'd become a national brand, we didn't have a big national sales force. Our beer got kind of pulled by the customer through TV shows that we do, documentary films, major PR that we get in big magazines. But suddenly there was a little brewery in every town, and a bar in Seattle or a bar in Chicago, the person would come in and be like, hey, why are you selling that beer from Delaware? I'm brewing my beer right across the street from you. Support the little guy, support the little guy. And so we were kind of in this mid-size stuck position. We were nowhere near the world's biggest breweries, but we were not the tiny little local brewery. And now that there's 9,000 breweries, it's like you could say, oh, wow, the little breweries in America won. But actually all 9,000 American-owned breweries only have 20% of the beer market in America. Four international conglomerates control over 80% of our country's beer world. Heineken, Constellation, which is Corona and Modelo, Anheuser-Busch, and Molson Coors. So all the little guys collectively are still these little Davids up against Goliaths. So about 4 years ago, my wife and I are like, look, we want the opportunity to grow. We want our awesome coworkers with these complementary superpowers to have opportunities to grow. And we need to align ourselves with a bigger American craft brewery to realize that opportunity. So as Andy said, about 4 years ago, we merged Dogfish Head, my wife and I's company, with the Boston Beer Company. And so Dogfish Head was a private mom and pop company, and then we merged it with this public company, which means any person can buy stock shares in this company. So away we went, and we still work every day at the company. I'm on the board of directors. I have the same title as the founder of Boston Beer, but I'm now the second biggest owner of a much bigger company. But the growth opportunity, not just to grow the revenue of our company, but for the opportunities for our coworkers to grow on an org chart of 3,000 people company, has been much greater. So it's very rewarding, and it's allowed us to stay relevant with a bigger sales force in this very competitive moment. So another name probably gets talked about in these hallowed halls is Charles Darwin. So there's he's been misquoted, that only the strong will survive. But really, the message that he was central to the concepts he really invented was this idea that it's not the strongest, but the species that are adaptable and can adjust. And so, as I mentioned to you, at Dogfish, we started really small. Being small allows you to adapt quickly without risking your lifeblood. If you were huge and do a big pivot, you could fall down, but when you're small, you can be nimble and do lots of adjustments and pivots. Also, for me personally, it was about adjusting my rambunctious nature to try and do risky and creative things instead of risky sort of negative things. My love of business allowed me to kind of channel that restless creativity towards more creative things, building a community that I could give back to. As I mentioned, the Head, Heart, and Hand became something that I became obsessed with. And then the other thing, community building for Dogfish Head, is the Head, Heart, and Hand coming from the agricultural background. At the heart of our company, we're really an ecological company, meaning our work as brewers is about combining natural ingredients in sustainable ways. So for an example of how the rubber meets the road, this just shows you all the different ingredients that grow that our company buys to make our beers and our cocktails and our teas, etc. So it's 500 million pounds of stuff, natural, beautiful, nourishing stuff that we make our products with every day. And by doing that, we're protecting, thousands and thousands of acres on which these ingredients grow, so that they're not paving paradise and putting up a parking lot. There's permeable surfaces. There's opportunities to sequester carbon by keeping all this land available for agriculture instead of building on it. So for our company, that's a big priority. We've donated over $1 million to the Nature Conservancy as one of Dogfish Head's biggest partners, because their mission's all about protecting the open spaces on which our products grow. So finding causes that are dear to your heart. If you can find them that's dear to your heart, the heart of your brand, not just you personally, it'll have an existentially awesome impact on making your brand, strong and stand out. So now to kind of just wrap up and show you what do we make and where do we make it. So this is our different facilities. So even, you guys might have some engineering components to your education here. So even the buildings themselves, the recipe for the beer, what makes a product distinct for us isn't just the liquid that's inside the bottle. We care just as much about designing the story-filled creative illustrations on the packaging, the bottles and the six-packs and the cans, but even our spaces ourselves. You can see there, our brand is off-centered goodness. We wanted to make them off-centered, unexpected shapes as you look at the buildings, unexpected illustrations as you look at that giant octopus that we did a mural of on one of our buildings. Because we want people to walk into our facilities ready to be, go on this exploration of goodness with us. And if we do it well and tell our stories well in our own buildings, then they leave as evangelists for our brand and tell their friends about it. And that's how it grows more authentically than us just trying to spend money on advertising where people just know it's a hard sell. If you can get the customers to feel like they're part of your journey and not just a paycheck for you, that's going to be something that's really special and a standout. Another thing, adapt and grow. We saw early on that craft breweries were opening really quick, and I was like, what could be a tangential but related product line that we could come out with, still themed around using these culinary ingredients? So I was passing in my pickup truck on the way after dropping off beer, this muddy scrap metal yard, and I saw a big piece of scrap metal in this junkyard that I was like, that scrap metal has the exact shape of a whiskey still. And I was like, I bet if we bought that for the value of the metal, me and my engineers can draw up an idea to turn that into a functioning distillery. So you can't really see, but I welded 2 kegs vertically to the left of the pot still, beer kegs, and that's where the condensing coil goes. So the science of distilling, it's basically you're making beer, right? The yeast, the little single-cell organisms are eating the sugar, making the alcohol. But the other stage with distillation is you heat up that alcohol, and the alcohol is a different evaporation temperature than the water. So the first thing that leaves that hot liquid is the alcohol, and then you cool it, and it condenses, and that's how you make gins, rums, and vodkas. So I built this thing, but started adding local apiary honeys to the rums, and finding unique hops and citrus peels to put in with the junipers and the gin. So applying the same off-centered recipe concepts to the world of distilling as we did to beer, and now craft distilled canned cocktails is the fastest growing segment in the alcohol space. Beer has slowed down, but thankfully we adapted and have this different line of products, which are these canned cocktails. Moving forward to our last 2 properties, this is our Dogfish Hotel. So it's tiny, right? We're a $4-point-something billion market company. Our hotel maybe does $2 million in revenue and 18 rooms a year, but it's an important place for that deep storytelling, because if someone comes and hangs out at the Dogfish restaurant for 2 hours, has cheeseburgers and a couple of beers, that's cool. They got to know our brand for 2 hours. If they go for a tour of our brewery for an hour, that's cool. They hung out with us for an hour. But if they stay at our hotel, that means they're immersed in our brand with our coworkers, in the spaces that we design to be as unique as our brand for at least a day. And if I'm in Delaware, I go to the little fireside in the backyard of that hotel, and I do a fireside chat where people bring beers, and we just have a rule of there's one conversation going, so you're not talking over each other, and we're going to talk about beverages for an hour. And these people who paid to stay in our hotel offer up all these great ideas because they feel like they're part of our journey. So tiny part of our business from a revenue standpoint, but really important for storytelling and getting direct input from customers on where our company should go next. So I mentioned the brewery is kind of the heart of our company. It's the big organism that's pumping out what we do coast to coast. And so you can see from this facility, yes, it's a big production facility with giant tanks that hold thousands of gallons of beer outside the buildings. But you can see we tried to instill our personality, our quirkiness into that facility. For example, there's a giant tree house at the entrance of it that fits 8 people. It's where we do our meetings in the spring and the fall because it's too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. So the leaders of our company crawl up into this tree house. There's a phone in that tree house that only dials to one place, and that's to the bar in the other room. There's a bucket on a rope in that treehouse that only goes down to replenish our beers while we're having ideas and enjoying them together. So, the book A Separate Piece that I wrote when I was here was kind of an inspiration. They had a big tree that they jumped off of that was central to that story, and I thought that'd be kind of cool. Yes, we have to be adults and run this company, but we'll think more creatively if we're coming up with our good ideas in this treehouse and having the latitude of our creativity to think like a child about things that don't exist, and instead of adults saying, well, that doesn't exist, say, well, I'm going to try and make a way for it exist, is still the best part of the journey. So just going quickly, I won't go through the details of each of these beers because you're not our target demographic. But I'll just say examples of adapting. Here's a beer that we're taking some of the DNA of a tequila cocktail called a Paloma, and some of the DNA, the barley and the hops of a beer. We're smashing them up and making a beer Paloma that's fermented not just from the barley of beer, but it's fermented from grapefruit juice and the agave that's in tequila. So it kind of tastes like something in between them. The other thing Andy mentioned was this belief in the good karma that comes with focusing on collaboration instead of the negative energy that comes with focusing on competition. So we find partners whose brands might not be in the spaces we are in, that resonate with our customers. So we recently released a beer with Wes Anderson, who's a pretty famous independent filmmaker that tells these really quirky, colorful stories, that their stories kind of match the quirky, colorful stories of our beers. So we partnered with them and did that. This is a little brewery in New York City called Talea. It's run by two women, which is a rare thing. Our beer industry needs more women leaders. So I wanted, when Mariah and I saw them doing their journey as women brewers who were trying to make beer less macho and who makes the bitterest beer in the world, they were trying to appeal more to wine-drinking women. So I was like, why don't we do a beer together, and we'll start boiling the beer in your brewery in Brooklyn, and we'll give ourselves 1 hour to run around the whole neighborhood and go to the bodegas, which are the corner stores that are usually tied to different ethnic groups in a place like Brooklyn. So we would go to the Indian bodega and get this spice, and then we go to the Mexican bodega and get this fruit, and we went in hunting and gathering around the bodegas, brought them back, and dropped all the ingredients we found into the boiling beer and called the beer Bodegoza, because goza is a fruited sour beer, but we hunted and gathered for all those ingredients in the bodegas. So trying to make a memorable story out of the name. The label itself is the map of Brooklyn. That the Easter eggs in it is all the different bodegas that we went to. So sometimes a project like that is, I could spend 100 emails and 3 days working on it, but we only made a few hundred cases of that beer. So it's not going to be impactful in a universe where we need to sell millions of cases of our beer, people would think. But the time we spend in those little projects are equally important to the ones that we spend on our flagship products. So this is a quote by the famous artist Andy Warhol, who grew up in Pittsburgh but made his career in New York. I love him as an artist because, in part, he named his space where he created art the factory. And even though brewing, we do it at big scale in a factory, we still treat it as an artful pursuit. But what this is saying is some pieces of art that we make as a brewery are meant to just be, experiential, done in real time, and then you make a little batch, you learn from it, you share it like the bodegas, and it goes away. And then other pieces of art have to be the big volume components of your business. So for us, our 60-minute IPA is the thing that we sell a lot of that allows us to do the projects that are more fun and crazier and artful. So they each have a role in our space, and we spent as much money designing our little tiny R&D brewery where we can take these little risks and adapt and learn in Darwinism way as we did spend on our big facility so that we can keep doing that experimentation. So much of this love of experimentation, collaboration, and storytelling I got to participate in and became part of my being on this very campus. So I'm so proud to be back here at this school. I know you guys hear how fortunate you are to go here all the time from adults, and it gets pretty boring. But I'm here as a person who got to experience it and had to adapt through all these different things in my life and my career. And Eaglebrook's been an amazing part of that. I'll leave you with this final quote before there's any questions, which is, white whale is kind of like this thing that you're searching for, this obsession, and it's kind of reminding us that it is about the excitement of the journey and not the destination. You may have a college in mind that you want to go to, or a career in mind that you think you'll go to, but you're going to get so much stimulus and input and opportunities to think through this. So stay passionate, stay itchy to learn new things, and I wish you guys luck on the next chapters of your adventures. So cheers. Thank you. We'll do a few questions. I think someone from the faculty might be going to help with a microphone. They got to be real questions, not, if I can tell, I just want a hat question, by the way.
Why was the reason you started making beer instead of like pursuing a different like career path?
Well, I loved the opportunity to be kind of the first commercial brewer to use poetry and short story kind of language and presentation into this world of beer. No one else was really doing it. I saw it starting to happen in coffee and a couple other industries, but I thought I could be first if I did it in the world of beer. And early on, like if I used a marketing agency, they would say our packaging, the way our labels look was stupid and ineffective because I was trying to put so much story in this tiny little font on a label, but people got into that. A certain small niche of people were like, actually, I want to know about what country he sourced this ingredient from, and blah, blah, blah. So it became a real advantage for us because nobody else was doing it. And I'm going to leave the hats up here, and you're going to use the honor system. I'm not going to throw a hat and take out an eyeball right now.
What was the biggest low for your company, and how did you and your coworkers jump back from that?
Okay, great question. The biggest low for our company, and how did we jump back from that? So I mentioned that I didn't wear hats. Certain hats didn't fit me very well. And early on, as I was growing Dogfish, the good thing I did is I never bought new equipment for the first 12 years we were open. I would just find used stuff like in the scrap yards like I showed you, and that way I didn't go into a lot of debt. If I bought all new equipment when we had bumpy years, if I owed a lot of money to a bank, I would not have been able to pay it, and we would have gone bankrupt. And I remember about 6 years in to running Dogfish, I bought this piece of junk bottling line that came from the soda industry in East Germany, basically, it would fill 2 full cases of beer and then 1 half case of beer. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good. It's the majority. But I was so dumb at math that I was like, that's all the profits in that half full case of beer, Sam. If you're just yielding just 2/3 of every ounce that you make, you're never going to be profitable. So an advisor saw our numbers, and I was like, look, we just got this write-up in the New York Times, and this show's coming down to do the story. And the advisor's like, Sam, cash is king, and you have no cash. So that was at a moment where I was like, oh my God, we might go bankrupt. And I had to convert some of my own ownership in Dogfish to bring in outside investors. So Mariah and I, for a while, only owned 80% of our company because we need to raise money. And when we used that money, we used it to bring in smarter math people than me so that wouldn't happen to me again.
What inspired you to name your company Dogfish Head?
Yeah, I always forget how goofy the name of our company sounds, Dogfish Head. And that's because while it means something, geographic to me. As I mentioned, my wife, who I went to Northfield Mount Herman with, grew up in Delaware, and that's how I discovered Delaware and was lucky enough to find a state that I could be the first in, which I couldn't in New England where I grew up. But my parents have a summer cabin up in Mid-Coast, Maine, Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, on an island called Southport. And you got to remember when I was, about 10 years older than you, I'm on a jog in Maine with my dad, and my dad thinks I'm still taking the classes he's sending me money for at Columbia. And he's like, hey, Sam, how are your classes going at Columbia? And, because I was thinking I wanted to be a writer or a teacher. And I was like, well, I kind of stopped going. Instead, I've been going every day to the public library, and I'm writing a business plan, Dad, to open a brewery. And he's quiet for a second while we're jogging, because he's paying for all that education. And then he goes, you know, Dogfish Head would be a good name for a brewery, because that was the name of the street that we jogged through every day, this head of land like Hilton Head called Dogfish Head. So in that one sentence, I got my dad's endorsement to go on the entrepreneurial journey, and I got the name of our company. I also didn't want to call our company Delaware Brewing Company or something that was tethered to geography, you know, verbatim, because my dream, even as the smallest brewer in the country, was to sell our beer coast to coast. So I liked that Dogfish Head sounded kind of crazy and whimsical like our recipes, even though to me it meant a place as well.
On the second slide, I saw that you had a Dogfish logo tattoo on your arm, and I wanted to ask if you could show us that.
Yeah. So as you guys know, I was not able to let you guys sample our beer today. We negotiated hard on that, and Andy put a hard line in the sand. But he did allow me to set up a tattoo booth right outside these doors. I'm just kidding. But no, so here, so there's mine. But look at how faded that is. And I actually got this tattoo. I would go to beer festivals, and again, I was on a TV show on the Discovery Channel that aired in 38 countries, and I've brewed in countries collaboratively in Italy, and Egypt, and China, and New Zealand, Canada, Norway. So I've got all these friends in the beer industry, and when I go do festivals, they show me their tattoos of Dogfish Head or of one of our beers. So I was getting embarrassed seeing these people go under the knife and in so much pain to have our logo, because then they would always say, okay, let me see yours, and I didn't have one. I was like, I got to really do this. So when our company turned 20 years old, I went to a local tattoo artist. I said, make me a tattoo that looks like it's already 20 years old. So I could be like, yeah, I got my tattoo. I've always had my tattoo. But they actually put it on my arm to look faded and old for that reason. Other questions?
How long did it actually take you from the point you started to the company, like had the idea, to the point where you were like well established?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I was really lucky that there were two models to open a brewery where you make the beer, but then you bottle it and can it and sell it outside the building. And then the model where you make the beer and people come into the building and enjoy your beer with food. I did the second model where I had a restaurant and a brewery. And thankfully, by doing that, again, adapting, I could have two different revenue streams: beer and people coming in for their meals. And we would have gone bankrupt if we didn't also have that restaurant, because we had 4 years where the brewing side of the business lost money. And if we didn't have the profits from the restaurant side of the business to offset the losses from the brewing side, we would have gone out of business. So short answer, it took about 4 years. We opened in 95, and it was really 1999 that the major national publications started writing about us, and that really we enjoyed about 20 years of double-digit growth once we had that big boom of press in 99. And okay, Andy. Yep.
Do you still feel that you have like some hats
Sweet.
that don't fit right?
Can you ask that again?
Do you still feel like you have some hats that don't fit right?
Some what that don't fit right? Oh, okay. I thought you were saying your pants don't fit right. I'm like, hey, man, take it easy on the old guy up here. That's a great question. And I would say yes, because when I merged my company with Boston Beer, as a board member, I now have to think about our 5 brands. So for 25 years, I've worn my heart on my sleeve, literally this brand. But when I combine my company with Boston Beer, we now own Dogfish Head, Truly Seltzer, Angry Orchard Cider, Sam Adams Beer, and Twisted Tea. So now when I'm out in the world thinking of a new recipe or visiting our distributors in Chicago, I'm having to think about all 5 brands. And honestly, that's a little hard for me as the founder of one of the brands to be as passionate about all 5. It's easy for the other beer brands and the cider brands, because they're these artisanal products that came from small farms like beer. But it's harder with our Twisted Tea and our seltzer businesses, which don't have as much like artisanal craftsmanship to them as beer and cider. So my challenge is I still wear that hat where I'm having to focus on products that aren't necessarily I'm super passionate about, but I need to show them as much care as the other stuff in our portfolio. So that's a challenge. I think that's the last.
Thank you so much, and have a little bit.